My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 28 years old. And 6 months ago, I learned the most painful truth of my life from the back of an ambulance while staring at a cracked ceiling light and wondering if I would ever walk again. Before that Thursday afternoon, my life was ordinary in the best way. I had a steady job, a small but comfortable apartment, and a boyfriend I believed I was building a future with. Richard Jones and I had been together for 3 years, ever since our last semester of college. We'd grown into adulthood side by side, shared groceries, shared bills, shared plans. He worked in digital marketing. I worked construction management, and while our worlds were different, I thought we balanced each other. Richard loved experiences, trips, social media moments that looked good online. I was quieter, more practical. I saved money. I planned long term. I had been setting aside cash for an engagement ring he didn't know about yet. That Thursday, I was driving home from a job site when everything shattered in seconds. A teenager ran a red light and slammed into the side of my car so hard it spun me across the intersection. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs. For 10 minutes, I couldn't feel my legs at all. I remember the panic more than the pain, the terrifying thought that something fundamental inside me had snapped and might never come back. In the ambulance, with a paramedic monitoring my vitals and another asking me to wiggle my toes, I called Richard. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Richard, I said when he answered, my voice thin and uneven. I'm in an ambulance. I need you at General Hospital. There was a pause, then confusion. What, Emily, right now? I have my flight tomorrow morning. Vegas, remember. The pain was making it hard to think clearly. I can't feel my legs, I whispered. They're worried about my spine. Oh my God, he said. But his voice didn't sound panicked, just startled. Okay, but how long is this going to take because the guys are expecting me at the airport at 6 a.m.? I stared at the ceiling, trying to process what I was hearing. I might be paralyzed, Richard. You're not paralyzed, he said quickly. Don't be dramatic. I'll come as soon as I can, but I need to know if this is going to mess up the weekend. Then the line went dead. The paramedic told me we were almost at the hospital. I lay there in stunned silence, realizing that the man I loved had just prioritized a Vegas trip over the possibility that my life might be permanently altered. When Richard finally showed up 2 hours later, he was checking his phone as he walked into my hospital room. He asked how I was feeling without looking up, and when the doctor explained the spinal inflammation and the need for observation through the weekend, Richard's first response wasn't concern, it was frustration. So through Monday, he asked, possibly Tuesday. I watched his face waiting for fear, for worry, for anything that resembled love. Instead, I saw calculation. When the doctor left, Richard sat down and said almost casually, I've had this trip planned for months, Emily. That night, he went home to pack. From my hospital bed, I saw his Instagram story, his suitcase on the floor captioned, Vegas, here we come. Something inside me went quiet, not angry, not broken, just clear. By Friday morning, he showed up with his luggage and told me without hesitation, I'm not missing my guy's trip for your drama. He kissed my forehead like I'd be fine by Monday and walked out. And that was the moment I realized I was already alone. The door clicked shut behind Richard, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the pain in my back. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the distant beeping of monitors and the muffled sounds of carts rolling down the hallway, trying to understand how someone could walk away so easily when everything I thought we were had just been tested. It wasn't that he left for Vegas, that was only the surface of it. It was how certain he was that I would be fine, how quickly he dismissed the fear in my voice, how confidently he chose his plans over my uncertainty. That kind of certainty doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from priority. A nurse named Maria came in to check my vitals not long after Richard left. She was gentle, unhurried, the kind of person who spoke softly, even when she didn't have to. She adjusted my IV, glanced at the doorway, and then back at me. Your boyfriend already head out? She asked quietly. I nodded, embarrassed by how small my voice sounded when I said yes. Maria paused, her hand resting lightly on the side of the bed, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to say more but didn't know how. Do you want to update your emergency contact information? She finally asked. The question shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Because in that moment, a woman I had known for less than 24 hours showed more concern for my well-being than the man I had shared my life with for 3 years. I asked her to put my older brother, Ethan Carter, as my emergency contact. Maria smiled and said it was a good choice. Ethan arrived the next morning, his face tight with worry he didn't try to hide. He sat by my bed, listened to the doctors explain my condition again, and didn't once check his phone while they spoke. When he squeezed my hand, it grounded me in a way Richard hadn't since the accident. I was discharged Saturday afternoon with strict instructions to rest and start physical therapy once the swelling went down. Ethan helped me into his car and drove me home in near silence, the kind that wasn't awkward, just heavy with things we both understood without saying. Walking into the apartment felt surreal. Richard's presence was everywhere, his shoes by the door, his coffee mug still in the sink from Thursday morning, his jacket draped over the chair like he might come back any second. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was overreacting, if I should wait until he got back and let him explain. Then I remembered his words in the hospital. Your drama. Something inside me hardened not with anger but with resolve. I started packing. Ethan didn't question me. He didn't tell me to calm down or think it through. He just grabbed boxes and helped. I moved slowly, carefully, my back aching with every bend, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the clarity settling over me. I packed Richard's clothes, his toiletries, his books, the little things that made up his half of our life. Each item felt like proof of how much space he had taken and how easily he'd left it behind. By Sunday evening, his belongings were stacked neatly by the door, and I had called the building manager to arrange storage. I changed the locks that night, my hands shaking only slightly as I turned the new key for the first time. I blocked Richard on social media, though, not before seeing his Vegas posts. Smiling photos at clubs. Drinks raised captions about living in the moment and choosing yourself. One line stuck with me. Sometimes you have to put yourself first. I almost laughed. I had put him first for years. I just hadn't realized he would never do the same for me. The weekend passed quietly. Too quietly. I slept more than I had in months, not because I was exhausted, but because my mind finally wasn't racing to keep up with someone else's priorities. On Monday, Ethan went back to work, and I spent the day alone starting physical therapy exercises and relearning how to trust my body. That night, a mutual friend texted to ask if I'd heard from Richard. I replied simply that I hadn't and that I didn't need to. What I didn't know then was that while I was rebuilding myself piece by piece, Richard's carefully planned weekend was already falling apart, and by the time he realized it, there would be no one left to catch him. I didn't hear about what happened in Vegas all at once. The details came to me in fragments passed along by mutual friends who didn't seem to know whether they were warning me or gossiping. On Monday afternoon, a friend named Mark texted me to say Richard was trying to reach me and that it sounded urgent. I asked what kind of urgent, and Mark hesitated before replying. That Richard hadn't said much, only that things had gone wrong and he needed help. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the table. Richard knew where I had been all weekend. If he needed help badly enough, he could have gone there. The fact that he hadn't told Mark why he was calling told me everything I needed to know. Over the next couple of days, the story filled itself in whether I wanted it to or not. Richard's friends had ditched him at a crowded club late Sunday night after meeting a group of women who caught their attention. According to Mark, Richard had tried to keep up drinking more than usual, determined not to be the boring one in the group. Somewhere in the chaos, his drink was spiked. He woke up hours later in a hotel bathroom with no phone, no wallet, no ID, and no idea how he'd gotten there. The same friends who had insisted this trip was about brotherhood and memories suddenly weren't answering his calls, at least not the ones he managed to make from the hotel phone. He spent Sunday night in a Las Vegas police station trying to explain his situation to officers who had heard versions of the same story 100 times before. By Monday morning, he was stranded. His parents lived out of state and couldn't wire money quickly. The friends who had promised to have his back were either unreachable or suddenly broke. Even Lena, his ex-girlfriend, someone he'd insisted was no longer relevant in his life, declined to help when he reached out telling him she didn't want to get involved in his mess again. The irony of that didn't escape me when I heard it. Meanwhile, my life felt strangely peaceful. I attended my first follow-up appointment, walked carefully but steadily, and listened to my physical therapist outline a recovery plan that made the future feel manageable again. At night, I slept without waking up to the sound of Richard scrolling on his phone beside me. I realized I hadn't felt this calm in years. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was something close relief maybe. Richard eventually made it home Tuesday 3 days later than planned, after begging his sister to put a last-minute flight on her credit card. By then, his things were gone and my routines had already shifted. I cooked for one. I moved through my apartment without adjusting myself to someone else's habits. When he showed up Wednesday evening and tried to use his key, the lock didn't turn. I watched through the peephole as confusion turned into panic, then desperation. I opened the door with the chain still on. "Your stuff is with the building manager," I told him before he could say much of anything. "What?" His voice cracked. "Emily, what's going on? I've been trying to call you for days." "I changed my number," I said calmly. "Why, I was in Vegas, you knew that." "I know," I replied, and that seemed to hit him harder than anger would have. He begged to come in to explain, to tell me what had happened. I told him I didn't need the details. When he finally blurted out that he'd been robbed, abandoned, and scared, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But it passed quickly. He had been scared before too, just not scared enough to stay. When I closed the door, his knocking echoed down the hallway, but I didn't open it again. For the first time since the accident, I understood something clearly: consequences don't always come loudly. Sometimes they arrive quietly, and by the time you notice them, the door is already closed. Richard didn't give up after that night. Over the next few weeks, he tried every path he could think of to reach me, circling my life like someone locked out of a house they were sure still belonged to them. He showed up at my office until security escorted him out. He messaged friends, family members, even distant acquaintances, hoping someone would pass along a word on his behalf. Each attempt felt less like love and more like panic, the kind that comes when someone realizes too late that the ground they stood on was never guaranteed. His life unraveled faster than I expected. Without my income covering most of our shared expenses, Richard couldn't afford the apartment we had once planned to upgrade together. He moved back in with his parents in the suburbs, a reality he tried to laugh off when mutual friends mentioned it, but no one missed the bitterness underneath. The same group of friends who had abandoned him in Vegas slowly stopped inviting him out after he kept asking to borrow money to cover his credit card bills. His world had been built on access to experiences, to people, to comfort. And once that disappeared, there wasn't much left holding it together. 2 months after the accident, Richard somehow found my new address. I had just come back from a physical therapy session, tired, but proud of how far my body had come when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, he was standing there, thinner eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, holding himself like someone bracing for bad news, even as he begged for a miracle. "Please," he said before I could speak. "I know I messed up. I was young. I panicked. I didn't know how to handle everything." I stepped aside just enough to talk, but not to let him in. He told me he had been scared of hospitals, scared of seeing me vulnerable, scared of how our life might change if I couldn't fully recover. As he spoke, the excuses peeled back layer by layer until what remained was something raw and uncomfortable. He hadn't been afraid of losing me. He had been afraid of being needed. "There's nothing left to fight for," I told him when he finally stopped talking. The words didn't come out harshly. They came out true. He looked at me like I had taken the air out of the room. "We were together for 3 years, he said. "Doesn't that mean anything?" It meant everything, I replied, until it didn't. "You chose Vegas when I needed you most." He tried to promise he would stay now that he had learned his lesson. That was when I understood the difference between regret and growth. "You didn't learn to stay," I said. "You learned that running has consequences." His face crumpled, but I didn't reach for him. 6 months earlier, his tears would have shattered me. Now they just confirmed what I already knew. As I started to close the door, he asked one last question, his voice breaking. "What if something happens to me? What if I need you?" I paused, then answered honestly. "I hope you choose better people than you did before." When the door shut, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from finally naming the truth and refusing to negotiate with it. 4 months passed quietly after that, the kind of quiet that feels earned. My back healed faster than the doctors had initially predicted, and with every physical therapy session, I felt more like myself again, not just in body, but in spirit. Recovery gave me time to reflect on what had happened, without the raw edge of pain sharpening every memory. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had better places to put mine. That was around the time I met Matthew Reed. He was part of the physical therapy department, not someone assigned to me directly at first, just a familiar face in the clinic who always seemed to notice when patients looked overwhelmed. When we started working together more regularly, what struck me wasn't charm or confidence, it was consistency. Matthew showed up early, remembered details, and never made my recovery about his schedule or his convenience. On days when my back hurt too much to do much more than stretch and breathe, he didn't rush me or minimize it. He stayed present. When I told him about Richard, he didn't react with outrage or judgment. He just listened. Then he said something that stuck with me. Some people panic when they're needed most. Others lean in. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply true. And in the weeks that followed, Matthew proved it in small, unglamorous ways by waiting with me during follow-up appointments, by checking in on bad days, by never making me feel like a burden. Richard still tried to reach me occasionally, usually late at night, through mutual friends or social media accounts I didn't even know he had. Last month, his sister sent a message saying he was sorry that he missed what we had, that he'd grown as a person. I asked her to tell him I hoped he was doing well, but that I wasn't interested in reopening a chapter I had already finished. Growth. I had learned doesn't require an audience. Looking back, the accident changed everything, but not in the way I once feared. It didn't take my mobility or my future. It stripped away illusions. It showed me who would stay when things became inconvenient, uncomfortable, and real. Richard showed me who he was in a crisis, and I believe him now. Sometimes people think the best revenge is making someone regret losing you. I've learned it's quieter than that. It's building a life where their absence no longer matters. Richard can reach out from whatever couch he's sleeping on these